no more than 20 metres from this chamber and within sight of the Dáil. And our thoughts today are with Johnson's family and his loved ones. His death justifiably sparked outrage at the government's inaction to tackle the ongoing housing crisis. And we heard lots of assurances, Taoiseach, from yourself and your ministers that things would improve. The Minister with responsibility for housing, Alan Kelly, said the government would end homelessness by 2016. But since then, the homelessness crisis has escalated. Chaos upon chaos. Chaos heaped upon chaos by your government. This morning, the CEO of Dublin Simon Community, Sam McGuinness, said that the homeless situation is going to get worse. Homelessness has increased by 80%. The number of children who are homeless has doubled. 70 to 80 families a month are becoming homeless. And in Dublin alone, there are over 1,500 children in emergency accommodation. That's 1,500 children who have nowhere to call a home this Christmas. We're also witnessing the fastest levels of rent increases since 2007, including in my own constituency in Louth, where rents increased by 13.3% in the last 12 months. And in Louth, there are almost 5,000 people on the housing list. Taoiseach, the government promised to build at least 1,000 social housing units this year. Reports indicated there were actually just 20 social houses built in the first half of the year, and Minister Kelly has conceded that there will be a mere 2,000 built in 2015. Taoiseach, this is a disgrace. Gummalescal 200. It's unfair. Now, you must surely accept that there's a need to declare a housing emergency. So, Taoiseach, why don't you liaise with the European Commission to have the housing crisis declared a national emergency so that the government could speed up its procurement process for the construction of social housing and fund the construction of social houses outside of the existing fiscal constraints. There's a way to resolve this crisis speedily.
Thank you.
It's your decision, Taoiseach. Why don't you opt for that?
Taoiseach.
Let me repeat again. One of the central problems here is the question of the supply of housing for people. And people are entitled to have decent accommodation made available to them. You are aware that this country was building 90 to 100,000 units a number of years ago, and that collapsed entirely down to 8,500 or 9,000. To get the sector to measure up to the plate, as it were, has required a great deal of effort and a great deal of work. Contractors out of business, building regulations, planning regulations, all of these things that are independent processes insofar as planning is concerned. Now, the government have put its money on the table in respect of social housing, and instructions and directions have been given to local authorities to get on with that job. And both ministers have been round to different local authorities in that regard. I would say to you that in respect of the rent situation, Deputy Martin feels that just increasing the rents. No, you're Deputy Adams, I know that. But the two of you are one of a kind on lots of things. The two of you are one of a kind. And I just want to say, Deputy Martin's position is that you increase the rent subsidy and everything will be fine. But it won't deal with the question of supply. Now, to reflect the fact that 1 in 5 homes in Ireland rent their home, the government took the opportunity to update the regulations governing this. So there's a time-limited measure to change the provisions around rent reviews, so that instead of taking place every 12 months, they will occur every 24 months until the 4th anniversary of its introduction. That gives a degree of stability to the rent sector. Secondly, even where a landlord has not increased the rent in the last 12 months, the Residential Tenancies Act currently going through the Oireachtas precludes the landlord from increasing the rate to no more than the market rate. And thirdly, as such, landlords cannot seek to set aside these measures by pricing in a rent increase to a level which is above the current market rate. And if they do, a tenant is quite entitled to take that case to the PRTB, and the rent will remain at the current level until the PRTB adjudicates on the matter. But you have a different solution, of course. I note that in your housing proposals, the Sinn Féin party said that they would fund social housing under the National Pension Reserve Fund. That's your answer to the question. Of course, that's a commercial fund fund and requires a rate of return. And to attempt to do something like that for social housing is something that would be very risky indeed. So you've got another view as to how you can sort out these things. If you don't build houses, social houses or private housing, then you don't deal with the supply of houses available. If you cannot deal with that, the pressures on the existing housing stock and increasing rent subsidy is not the answer to that. I repeat again, Cancora, that there is a difference in the categorisation or the classification of homeless and rough sleepers. Nobody wants to see families or children or anybody on the streets. In respect of the people who sleep rough on the streets, a great deal of effort has gone into it, and I don't see any reason why the facilities and the opportunity that's available now would mean that anybody should be on the streets of any city this winter, and I hope that that's not the case at Cancora.
Deputy Adams.
Yeah, it's their own fault, isn't it, Taoiseach? There's no reason for them to be on the streets this Christmas. It's their fault. You should take your answer to me and read it back to yourself or play it back to yourself very, very slowly. I asked you a very simple question, and Sinn Féin will be releasing a policy on housing later on this week, but I said to you, why don't you liaise with the European Commission to have the housing crisis declared a national emergency in order to get the various procurement processes for the construction of social housing? You ignored that entirely. In your answer, you talked about bringing stability to these families. Taoiseach, you brought chaos to the lives of these families. You brought chaos to tenants, to families who are homeless as a result of your policy. Your policy is not to build social housing.
Question, please.
You're continuing to refuse to invest in it, and that's a deliberate choice by you. And you know what side you're on. You're on the side of unscrupulous landlords, including members of Fine Gael, who are profiting from the housing crisis. Now, you should be on the side of the homeless. You should be on the side of those who are languishing on housing waiting lists.
Would you put your question?
And you should be on the side of those who are struggling. You should be on the side of those who are struggling to keep a roof over their heads. So will you, Taoiseach, accept that your government has failed to live up to your promise, not my promise, your promise, to correct the underlying issue, a lack of housing in this state? And will you accept that you have failed to meet your targets in respect to social housing construction this year? And this is yet another failure on top of a litany of failures, chaos upon chaos.
I don't accept your assertion that the government have failed. I accept that the government have faced this challenge, which is unprecedented in the scale of the collapse of the construction sector, in the scale of the fact that we had no resources to deal with the many challenges that presented themselves, and that we're now in a much better position. And I've just read out for your colleague, Deputy Martin, some of the things that have happened in the recent initiatives being taken by the government. And I'd remind you again, Deputy Adams, that the government have already put £2.2 billion on the table for social housing. Instructions and directions have been given to local authorities. All the chief executives have been called together by the Minister for the Environment and by his Minister of State, and they've given those instructions to get on with building the social housing for which they've been given money. And NAMA, in addition to that, have been in consultation with the Minister for Finance, and they expect to build 20,000 houses on their sites with their contractors for the private housing sector, which will improve the private housing stock, which is very much behind what's required, particularly in the larger cities in the country. So I don't accept your assertion at all, Deputy Adams. We have set in place a whole range of initiatives, both at local authority level, by legislation, in dealing with the homeless, in dealing with those who are becoming homeless, in terms of housing, voided units, modular units, social housing, private housing. But it's a matter for the sector now to measure up and supply those. The resources and the facilities are in place.
Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan, please. Thank you. Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan. Thank you.
I listened to the speeches from Paris.